Being and Caring, A Psychology for Living by Victor Daniels and Laurence J. Horowitz, as read by The Happy President. Part 4, Knowing Our Minds, Chapter 16, Thinking. Pablo Picasso used to watch children form meanings from the concepts available to them and let them enter his studio and rearrange work in progress. They could think and respond without issues of prestige or their hidden agendas determining their processes. To know what to think about and how, we have to perceive and interact with our environment, an environment filled with as much with illusions as with realities. Psychologist Sheldon Kopp points out that illusions start early in childhood. We learn a deceptively comforting fairy tale vision in which frogs become princes and goose girls become queens. Growing up means modifying illusions, accepting princes who owe mortgages and queens who assert feminist rights. But as we grow up, we buy into adult illusions. These include mistaken ideas about what we're like and how we have to live our lives, and distorted concepts of the way the world is. The illusions of both childhood and adulthood include not only our conceptions of the world as we've been told it is, but also of the world as we experience it and tell ourselves it is. What we tell ourselves it is can come out of an intuitive intelligence that goes beyond the limits of ordinary rationality. Albert Einstein's relativity theory, Max Planck's quantum mechanics, and Niels Bohr's insights into subatomic matter and energy went beyond the rational to pave the way for some of the technological leaps of the past quarter century. And Heisenberg stated with his uncertainty principle that we can't observe or participate in events without influencing their nature and outcomes. Another physicist, Capra, points out that some of the statements of modern physics echo those of Buddhists who studied consciousness 2,000 years ago. The external world and a person's inner world, or Lama Govinda, are the same fabric in which the threads of all forces are woven into an inseparable net of endless, mutually conditioned relations. Today we can see how a commitment to conventional modes of reasoning about the nature of reality can limit us, just as it would have greatly slowed scientific development. Carlos Castaneda's teacher addressed that issue. "Yesterday you stopped the world," he told Carlos. "What stopped inside you was what people have been telling you the world is like. We maintain our conception of the world with our internal talk, and as we talk to ourselves, we also choose our paths, perhaps repeating the same choices endlessly." Cognitively oriented psychologists like Albert Ellis have said the same thing. "I want you," Don Juan said to Carlos, "to learn how to get to the crack between the worlds and how to enter the other world. There is a place where the two worlds overlap. The crack is there. It opens and closes like a door in the wind." Though the other world Don Juan was speaking of was a radically altered state of consciousness, anyone who is not totally trapped in a given pattern of perceiving can find smaller cracks in our ways of structuring our words and thoughts and see through them to other ways of understanding. This chapter and the next one open a way to seeing through these small cracks. Concept and reality. According to phenomenologist Merleau-Ponty, beneath a thought there lies a first opening on things without which there could be no productive thought. This first opening is our contact with the thing or event itself, unencumbered by ideas about it. As Zen master Mumon put it, "In spring, hundreds of flowers. In autumn, a harvest moon. In summer, a refreshing breeze. In winter, snow will accompany you. If useless things do not hang in your mind, any season is a good season for you." To help us break through our limiting concepts to a direct yet multidimensional experience of our world as it is, Zen sayings remind us that no statement or concept is identical to what it tells us about, as noted in Soseki's haiku, Butterfly, these words from my brush are not flowers, only their shadows. Our concepts are almost always in some measure arbitrary, depending as they do on the way we group events to suit our purposes. We can learn to tailor our concepts to fit reality instead of trying to stuff reality into our concepts. The meaning of truth. Truth calls to us, drawn by the innocent laughter of a child or the kiss of a loved one, wrote Khalil Gibran. When I see, touch, and smell a rose, I experience it directly and know it as it is. This is my personal truth. I'm unlikely ever to know the whole truth of it. Someone else may experience the event differently and know other sides of it. Consider the very expression, to see something in another light. A landscape looks different in the soft, warm light of sunset than at high noon. Truth exists in each of these experiences. I consider a statement or concept true to the degree that it helps me clearly experience and respond to the thing or event it represents. A rose, a pancake, a landscape, this statement. I'm clear with myself to the degree that what I tell myself coincides with what I know and feel at deeper levels of my awareness. I'm clear with you to the degree that I tell you what I think and feel rather than pretending to think and feel otherwise. I speak my personal truth to the extent that what I say corresponds to the event as I experience it. We all have areas where what we tell ourselves is not consistent with what we know at deeper levels. Take Augie's mother. As Augie made his mark on the world, in the record business, he said, he began coming by to pick up his mother in a big, expensive car. Some people whispered that Augie was in the rackets, but his mother would believe none of it. Yet she would constantly wring her hands as she sat smiling in Augie's limousine. She was always proud of how well her son had done, until the day Augie was killed by the mob. When I realize that I've confused or deceived myself in some way, I don't have to justify my self-deception. I did what I did. That's who I was then. Now I can find new ways to be. Another dimension of personal truth lies in considering how, when, and where I find truth in what I do, and how, when, and where I don't. To have the deepest influence, says the I Ching, I must live my truth as well as speak it. When I make decisions, I want to avoid letting my wishes, beliefs, or ideology blind me to important realities. I want to listen to my heart as well as to my head, and to the truth buttons that keep me honest with myself. In many cases, right and wrong are not clear-cut. The choices are never easy when I know that either I or someone else will suffer in some way no matter what I do. When I insist that everything I do is right and good, I avoid the poisonous or destructive elements in what I do. When I insist that everything I do is wrong or bad, I overlook the helpful, caring qualities I do have. Concrete and abstract. Alfred Korzybski, a Polish-American scientist, linguist, and philosopher, noted that defects in language, which are handed on from generation to generation along with useful information, can lead to grave errors in thinking and communication, in part because our meanings can differ radically even when we use the same words. When you and I think and talk, we might be thinking and talking about different things. We get into trouble when we forget that we're dealing with abstractions and act as though they were concrete things and events. For instance, two men may argue about whether it's woman's nature to stay home and care for children or to want to go out and have a career without realizing that the question has no answer. When we move from women as an abstraction to individuals, we find that it's Sharon Adams's nature to want to stay home with the kids and Maria Beltran's to want a career. When you and I disagree, we may have stated our disagreement in an abstract, general way. We can clarify what we're talking about if I give you a concrete instance of what I said abstractly and ask you for the same. I'm just not sure what you mean. Will you give me an example? Governments have manipulated people's thinking by creating abstractions, as in Vietnam, asking us to think of entire nations as the abstraction enemies and disregard our concrete awareness of the people in them as individuals. Politicians are frequently skillful at taking a question they don't want to answer, raising it to the next level of abstraction, and talking about that instead about the issue at hand. For example, homeless thousands in cities becomes a threat of socialism and a welfare state. I can also use my abstractions to avoid personal events. For instance, you tell me about something that made you feel terribly lonely. I reply, yes, I read an article about loneliness the other day. I've moved from your specific event to the abstraction of loneliness. We miss the contact we make when I respond to your event. Our words and concepts, the maps in our minds, can even come to have a structure all their own that falsifies the real events they represent. Korzybski reminds us that no matter how good a map we make, the map is not the land that it depicts. His classic statement, "The map is not the territory, the word is not the thing," is a basic principle of clear thinking. The ability to think and converse on an abstract level is important. Without it, we would have, as semanticist Wendell Johnson says, a basket full of information but nowhere to go with it. Through abstraction, we connect our facts and consider their implications with our imagination, fantasy, and sometimes illusion. Johnson notes that dull writers and speakers often remain locked into just one level of abstraction. Either they stay so abstract that we never quite find out what they're talking about, or they stay at the level of detailed description without tying their facts together and considering their implications, causing us to ask, so what? Interesting writers and speakers, suggests Johnson, play up and down the levels of abstraction as a harpist moves up and down the strings. Cognitive and emotive meaning. Words have not only cognitive, but also emotive meaning. They evoke feelings as well as trains of thought. In Buddhist psychology, this is called Vedana. Every mental event and every sensory experience has a positive, negative, or neutral feeling tone, sometimes subtle, sometimes powerful. The emotive side of our language can misdirect us in two important ways. First, emotive meaning can mask cognitive meaning, whipping up emotions so that logic gets lost. Conversely, neutral terms can be substituted for heavily loaded ones to dull the force of a statement and make mundane something that would otherwise be provocative. Philosopher Howard Kahane points out that the second approach was used during the Vietnam War. Euphemisms were developed. Concentration camps became pacification centers. Precision bombing became surgical strikes. Sampans became waterborne logistic craft, and napalm became selective ordnance. More recently, tax increases have given way to revenue enhancers. Huge multi-warhead ICBMs are termed peacekeepers, and death has become negative patient care outcome. Logic and illogic. When I listen to myself, I can be alert for the ways faulty logic leaves me inept and feeling bad. When I listen to you, others, or the media, I want to distinguish between the actual information I get and what the source wants me to believe and to do with it. Almost every source of information has a viewpoint and an I want statement built in. Logic is a set of rules designed to make our statements consistent with each other. Illogic often points to untruth, but something that's logical may not be true. Philosophically, an argument is valid if it follows the rules of logic. Otherwise, it's invalid. A conclusion is sound only if valid and based on true assumptions. We look now at several common logical errors, some of them neon arrows that tell us that someone's trying to mislead us. Invalid reasoning. Here, the information and assumptions presented may or may not be accurate, but there's no valid connection between them and the conclusion. For example, ad hominem argument, literally argument directed toward the man, attacks the person. You're too inexperienced or weird or old to know anything about that. Ad hominem arguments often involve ridicule. An ad hominem argument has nothing to do with the evidence or issue at hand. Appeal to authority uses someone's prestige as a substitute for information. When we hear from authorities, we do better to listen to their evidence and reasoning, which can help us make up our own minds, than to their opinions and conclusions. Appeal to popularity, a variation on appeal to authority. Everyone thinks so, or Rosenquist can't be guilty. 27 respected local citizens and his mother vouched for his character. Another variation is traditional wisdom. It's never been done, so it shouldn't be done. False analogy. One thing is likened to another when in fact there's an important difference between the two events. For example, cops are a bunch of little Hitlers. In fact, police are elaborately bound by regulations, and most do their best to uphold the laws. Hitler considered himself above the law. False classification or false labeling. An unemployed person might be labeled lazy despite many genuine attempts to find work. And there are politicians who use the term communist dupe for anyone who opposes their programs or policies. Jumping to a conclusion or insufficient evidence. Here, there's relevant evidence, but not enough to warrant the conclusion that's drawn. I didn't get the job. I guess I'm just a loser. Responding to just one aspect of the situation, the conclusion jumper ends up in the mud hole. Non sequitur, literally, it does not follow, sometimes called the irrelevant reason. The reason given for accepting or not accepting a conclusion is irrelevant to it. One congressman went on and on about the need for more housing for citizens of his great country when the issue was not that at all, but whether the bill before the House was the right one to provide it. Red herring. An irrelevant, usually emotionally loaded matter is brought up to distract attention from the real issue. The name comes from an alleged practice of dragging a herring, a strong-smelling fish, across a trail to throw off a pursuing dog. Slippery slope. Without supporting evidence, an action is presumed to lead inevitably to an unwanted event, which will lead in turn to another unwanted event, and so on. Let you stay out until 9:30? If I do, next week you'll be drinking and petting in the back seat of someone's car. Soon you'll be dragging in at 3 a.m. and before long, I'll have an unwed mother for a daughter. Two wrongs make a right. This says that if you do something harmful, it's okay for me to do the same. Reasoning that's unsound, even if valid. In this case, even when the arguments are logical, the assumptions or information on which they're based are false or unknowable. Begging the question means endorsing without proof some form of the very question at issue. We have to go to the reception because we decided that's what we were going to do this evening. Loaded labeling mixes up facts and value judgments, making it hard to tell which is which. Sometimes this is done intentionally to deceive, and sometimes even when the speaker or writer doesn't know the difference. Questionable assumption means making an assumption that's inadequately supported. Since our kids don't care enough to get top grades in high school, I'm sure not going to lay out money for college. Perhaps they do care, but can't hold down their part-time jobs and get top grades too. Straw person means distorting someone's views or actions and then attacking the person on the basis of the misrepresentation. For instance, advertisements attacked a candidate who voted against a bill for voluntary school prayer when actually the bill made school prayer compulsory. Suppressed information. Even data that's accurate may be biased if only the information that supports one side is given. What's not said can be as important as what is said. Whether the task at hand is to clarify the issues in a family spat or to measure the integrity or intelligence of candidates for public office, listening for these forms of faulty reasoning can be helpful. Further paths to clearer thinking. Two other tricky rhetorical devices deserve mention here. One is the use of words like clearly and obviously, with the implication that any reasonable person would certainly agree. We can ask, to whom is it obvious? What seems obvious to you may not be obvious at all, or even believable to me. I want to be able to challenge you when it's not. Similarly, in incomplete comparisons, compared to what or to whom is often left unsaid. Better or worse than what or whom? Best or worst for what? Subjectivity and objectivity. Let's be objective about this is a statement that assumes a mantle of instant respect. By objectivity, we usually imply indifference to the outcome. This attitude requires being emotionally neutral about a matter. It assumes gathering as much evidence and information as we can, taking into account all the different viewpoints available. In reality, I seldom feel completely neutral about anything important to me. To be totally objective, I'd have to become someone who doesn't participate in life but only observes. Even a physicist in a laboratory is using instruments that are technological extensions of the physicist's own way of seeing the world. All I know for certain is, this is what I am experiencing. Actually, I'm most objective when I describe what I am experiencing as my experience and no more than that. Wearing a mask of objectivity is a handy way to avoid acknowledging my biases, feelings, and worldview. I may say, I'm just being logical, when actually I'm heavily emotionally involved in what I'm saying. To be open to the facts, I have to be willing to see my biases and what they mean to me. Then sometimes I can see past them. This subjective stance helps me be as objective as I can. Dualism and polarities. Most of us are accustomed to thinking in either-or terms. Things are either this or that. Is the water hot or cold? Is she tall or short? This is true and that is false. We are good and they are bad. This way of thinking is called dualism. Such a dualistic either-or thought pattern can cause us to think that ideas that seem to be contradictory cannot all be valid. For example, I cannot both love you and hate you. I must love or hate. Most things and events fall along a continuum of similarity to each other, like degrees on a thermometer. Yet once I've accepted the either-or assumption, I see the matter only in that way. Many questions cannot be answered in the terms in which they're put, especially when they require an either-or answer. Similarly, if you and I want to work out some trouble we have in our relationship, we'll both have to give up the idea that one of us is right and the other wrong. New possibilities can open up when we start to think in terms of polarities instead of dualisms. According to an ancient Chinese saying, things that oppose each other also complement each other. In each side of a polarity, there is some value and some drawback. Mao Zedong writes eloquently on this subject in On Contradiction. I can carefully consider the validity as well as the limitations in the side of polarity I reject, and the shortcomings as well as the advantages in the side I accept. Then I move out of the stuck place I'm in when I cling to one end of the polarity and negate other options. For instance, my friend Lillian was unhappy with her tendency to become mother in all her relationships with people. With time, she also came to know the little girl who needs to be taken care of inside of her. At first, she disliked both. Eventually, she found that the mothering she could give her little girl could be nourishing, and her little girl's aliveness helped her mother creatively. In paradoxical logic, ideas that appear to be or are contradictory may also be true. Paradoxical logic works because our ideas leave out many aspects of the real events that underlie them. The omitted parts of the real events may all be valid, even though the ideas we use to talk about those events may seem to contradict each other. Buddha learned something about who he was from his extremes of being a wealthy prince and a penniless, wandering ascetic. Out of these experiences, he forged a middle way that suited him. Remember that there may not be just one, but several different kinds of opposites to a given idea or action. Linear and lateral thinking. The left hemisphere of the brain, which controls the right side of the face and body, regulates the kinds of thinking that most intelligence tests measure: logical reasoning and the ability to manipulate verbal and numerical concepts. The right hemisphere, which controls the left side of the face and body, regulates spatial, artistic, creative, and intuitive mental tasks. This side of our brain can grasp a situation in its entirety without grappling and figuring. Innovative thinking can occur through bringing together two or more different frames of reference. That's how Archimedes found a way to measure the volume of an irregular shape. Needing to know whether a crown that had been given to the king of Syracuse was pure gold, he struggled for days to think of a way to measure the crown. Then, one day when he took a bath, he saw the water rise in the tub as he lowered his body, and the solution came to him. The crown would displace a volume of water, which was easily measured, equal to its own volume. The answer came from putting together the measuring the crown frame of reference with the taking a bath frame of reference. Only when he was relaxed and off guard, bathing instead of working, did the needed new frame of reference enter his consciousness. Such divergent or lateral thinking is essential to creativity, which requires both it and convergent or linear thinking alike. Frank Barron found that on clinical tests, creative people score high on both flexibility and intellectual ordering. And Calvin Taylor found creativity to be a reconciliation of opposite endowments. As remote things were associated, richness was pruned to parsimony, and an insatiability for intellectual ordering rose phoenix-like from seeming chaos. George Prince presents a method for opening our minds to lateral thinking and avoiding the trap of dualism that has been widely applied in corporate and government settings. We can most easily step outside the old worn grooves and think creatively when we both separate our illusions from our realities and find ways to integrate our fantasies in our processes. End of chapter 16.